Hey everybody, it's Rowan here. Welcome to 4 Litres TV. We're getting straight into my conversation with my friend Richard Harmer. And right from the start, I wanted to have a conversation with this exceptional human. And the inspiration for it was this. The inspiration for it was something I saw Richard share on social media about connecting with his local community in the COVID period. Now, real time, Melbourne's in easing lockdowns, but it's been, from what I can see, a tough season. And I saw Richard just bare his heart, but also bring some of his creativity and thinking and ideation to it. So, mate, welcome to 4 Litres TV. Great to have you.
Oh, fantastic. I'm really excited to be here. Thanks for the invitation, mate.
Yeah, I'm stoked. So the inspiration for this conversation was you sharing about essentially your care for your local community. And so, but what a lot of people don't know is they don't know that you really are you're a human development expert. You understand people and their place in community and organizations, and that's got layers and layers and layers of what I call genius. Like, I'm a fan, so let's just start there. But it was the passion with which you decided to commit to sharing with people in the community that really struck me. So, 2 questions to start with. What were the circumstances that precipitated you really getting on the front foot to be reaching out to the community in this way? And then back us up to a bit of the Richard Harmer origin story that I think fed into that. I want to hear a bit about that.
Yeah, so, you've already shared that we've been in Melbourne in lockdown. We're at a day 102 right now.
Incredible.
Of lockdown version 2.0. So we've already had one go at this, and we're in the second lot, and I think we're pretty close to getting out. But look, what I was really noticing, not just in my local community, because I guess in order to answer the question, you need to define what community is, But if I just think about my physical community, that is my neighbourhood, and my friends that I see in the street as I walk to my local coffee shop or whatever it might be, you just don't have that connection because practically you're not leaving your home. So this very sense of bumping into each other as you would do, which maybe we'll come back to, but bumping into each other and other people in your community and having those random conversations where you find out how people are and what's going on around you and what's working, what's not, just aren't happening. So, I think the post that I posted was everyday acts of community and the importance of everyday acts, because community doesn't just happen. Community happens by people doing something. And practically that happens when you're walking to your supermarket or your shops or kids to school or something, but that wasn't occurring. So as a consequence, I think the very fabric of my local community was feeling a bit threadbare. So I just actively tried to make connections. But this sort of goes back a bit further than this, as you say, my origin story. I'm a developmental psychologist, as you know. I did a PhD in what is spirituality and what is a spiritual life. I am deeply passionate about and interested in individual and community identity. And when we ask questions like, who am I? What do I stand for? What's the world out there? How do I fit? This is what I'm fascinated by. So maybe I'll get back to even this notion as we sort of get into this, why now, is what is community? So if I break it down into 2 things, to commune and unity. So to commune, taken, like you have more of a background in this way than I do, Ro, but communion, for example, is intimate sharing between people. Well, that might be intimate sharing of thoughts or feelings about emotions, our relationships, our spiritual path, whatever it might be. And community is a union or a bringing together of those intimate thoughts and experiences. So this very sense of community, this sense of sharing, and brings with it this idea of belonging. And I'm taking from a really amazing book I read several years ago called Community, The Structure of Belonging by Peter Block. And he defined belonging, or unpacked belonging, as being three things. To belong is a sense that you're a part of. To belong is you own something, it belongs to me. And the third is I long to be with. That is a yearning. And I have this sense that these three elements of I'm part of something, I own it, and I want to be part of it, is all about support. And I think that's what's really been missing, not for any intended purpose, or nefarious reason, but it's just been missing a sense of belonging, a sense of being part of something, being connected, feeling like we own community isn't there because we're not even interacting with it in a way.
Yeah, look, I think you're absolutely right. And, you know, for people that are either watching this live or after the fact, we go into most of these conversations unscripted. You know, Richard and I we talked about the bit. I said, listen, I think we need to have a conversation about community, connection, and COVID, and the fact that this idea came up in you walking around your local area. And I just think it's essential because, and then what I was secretly hoping would happen, mate, I was secretly hoping that expertise that you've got would connect into the current reality that people are experiencing. And what I'm hearing you talk about is the fact that there are some things that we fundamentally need as human beings that the circumstances we find ourselves in have taken away. I'll give you one example. One example is that my kids have had an opportunity to return to a school not in Victoria because for whatever reason we were out of the state early and we didn't return. And when my daughter, my 10-and-a-half-year-old, found out she was able to go back to a school with real kids and a real schoolyard and real kid noise, this is what she said. She said, finally, I can play and talk to a child not on a screen. And these are from kids that their lives are built around multi-screening. They're built around the ability to interact with multiple types of technology. And so that's what I'm hearing. What got taken away from her was that belonging, the connection, the be with factor. And there is actually an ancient Hebrew word, koinonia. It means caring enough to share. So I'm hearing all of that in your introduction. Am I on track? And how would you comment on it?
Well, most definitely, because if I take a bit of human development in this sort of angle here is we understand ourselves through our relationships with others. There's a bunch of social psychology research here, but, you know, to the point of whether some combination of our 10 closest friends. But in the sense of I get to understand who I am and what's important to me by my interactions with you and the other people around me. Okay. So if we're interacting on a screen, which many of us are still doing, like if we're in a workplaces, well, unless you're an essential worker, we're probably going to be interacting with each other on screens for another few months at least. So with a sense of who I am becomes not only, I don't even want to say the word digitized, but it's not real in a way, because I understand by the subtleties of everything from body language to the emotional or the energetic connection we have between each other when we're talking. And that's not the same when we're online. And in part in an online environment, when I think about identity, without getting too sort of psychological on it, we have multiple identities online. So if I'm on Facebook, for example, my persona, inverted commas for want of a better word, is slightly different than my persona on LinkedIn or Insta or on a Zoom call. So this very notion of who am I, well, it depends what platform I'm on. So it gets even more confusing to work out, not just for kids, but for adults. Like, and my kids are the same. They just went back to school last week. They have not been so happy, honestly. It's
fantastic, isn't it?
Oh, it's amazing. Like the joy, they've got right now.
So I want to come back to that multiple identities piece. But again, you talked about the whole idea of community being intentional. But I want to back it up to one problem that might either be explicit or implicit for people. How do we figure out that we've lost something, and how do we name it? So with your sort of experience around that, Heifetz, for example, Ron Heifetz talks about the idea of honouring your losses and actually naming it and saying that's what it's happened. But across the population in general, how do people figure that out, and how do we name it in order to be able to respond properly, other than just acting out, complaining? I mean, I've heard of issues of, domestic violence has increased, and obviously there's pressures on mental health and wellness and various things like that. But what sort of things should we be looking for?
Well, the first thing to say is about that is the identity that we were pre-COVID is not something that we can return to. So that's the loss.
Agreed.
But I don't know whether we have a majority of acceptance of that yet. I think so, but there's portions. There's portions of society. So if we think about what fostering community is all about, it's about four things. And I think these four things are the things that are being compromised. Right? And I'm taking this from like years and years ago when I was really, I was in this crossroads of finishing working with an organisation. I started my own consulting firm. This is going back a decade now. And I was trying to still work out, like, I'm no longer this, but I'm not yet that. And I think if I take that frame of the liminal space.
Yeah, so important.
No longer that, not yet this. We're in the in-between right now. And that's uncomfortable. But I think that's actually where the greatest growth and exploration and creativity is. So I think about what it is to foster community. I did a workshop, as I said, years ago with a guy by the name of Jim Deers, who was the head of the Department of Neighbourhoods of Seattle. And he just happened to be in Australia. And it was like serendipity. I happened to be in this workshop run on by my local council. And he said that community is about, and fostering community is about four things. It's about fostering identity and shared identity. So my local community, my neighbourhood, is Fitzroy North, and Fitzroy North has a community, it has an identity different to Kew or Footscray or Preston. So there is a sense of an identity that we sign up for, and we see that identity when we're walking around. The second is fostering community is about naming and sharing the identity. So if I think about what we've lost, the flip side of that is we've lost identity, because in part it's not just our local community, like our neighbourhood, but the identity of work, the identity of friendship groups, because we're not seeing our friends as often. So there's a whole bunch of shared identity which helps me understand who I am that's missing. That creates a lot of anxiety and fear because of that's sort of raising. The second is a way of managing scale. So when a community gets bigger and bigger, then we need a way of helping people stay connected. Now, the way we stay connected, like in an organisation, for example, is you walk in the same front door at about 9 o'clock every morning and you hang out with each other. Like there's a way of scale there that isn't the same when we're less. So this idea of connection itself is lost. because the very way we do connection and the routines of connection, that is, it's sort of done for us because the very routine of working 9 to 5, for example, or walking the kids to school, for example, is not there. So the identity is not there. There's a loss. The connection's not there because the mechanics of how we connect with each other is not there. The notion of sharing ideas, like Jim G's called this about bumping places. When you go to your coffee shop and you stand in line, you talk to the person next to you. You understand what's going on in their world, and people share problems and find solutions, like haphazardly in those conversations, and they're not there. We're trying to solve stuff by ourselves. And this idea of shared work, the last element of community, is when a community does something together, when it has a shared activity it does, it reinforces that sense of community, and we don't have that either. So I think about naming what we're losing is a sense of identity, who we were, a sense of connection, a sense of sharing, and a sense of contribution. But it's a liminal space. We're no longer this, not yet that. So this is where the opportunity is. We're losing. But when I just think about community and identity, identity of an individual or a community doesn't go backwards. It goes forwards. And another way of thinking about it is it doesn't get smaller, it gets bigger. It grows, it evolves, it develops. So even though we might feel like we're losing something, we're going to be gaining a lot more out of this. So
let me just jump in there for a sec, because based on what you've said, what's going on, particularly for the city of Melbourne, what's been going on globally for people as a result of this, all of those things have been taken away in some way, shape or form. And the key isn't wishing that they hadn't been taken away, from what I'm hearing you're saying. The key is reframing, I was that, I'm not yet this. And I think that's a fantastic reframe to understand the process of transition. And am I hearing that right?
Yeah, it's because identity, and my background is developmental psychology, so I was trying to look through this lens, but this idea of identity is an evolutionary process of spiraling or expansion. And in a perfect world, you would seamlessly transition from who I was to who I'm going to be. But it doesn't work out that way. There's always a messy middle. And we just happen to be in the messy middle of it.
Over and over and over in different parts of the way our world's rolling out. Yeah.
Yeah. We've been here before, mate. You know, it's not like we're, like, if you think about every single human being has been an infant, has been a toddler, a young adult, an adolescent. You know, we've all grown, and each of those things has been messy. You know, I don't know about you, but me going through puberty wasn't fantastic. So this notion of we're always changing. We don't yet know what we're going to be changing into, but what we do know is that where we were doesn't fit anymore. Now, we know this is the case because if you just think about where we were, people in organisations feeling overworked and stressed, discretionary effort was the new value. We've got the whole way organisations and their business models weren't working. You think about how communities operating at a local level. There's a whole bunch of stuff that was, in essence, to be transparent, like broken. But we were sort of patching it together. And this is a chance for a reset. And that's really what so I come back to this idea of community. A community can't change unless a few things are in place. First, a community must understand what it is. So when I start talking about shining a light on my local neighbourhood and my friendship group, because I've got communities that are online and, you know, spread around the world. So it's about, who are we? How are we connected with each other? That's step one. We need no system or no community can change until it becomes aware of what it is and what it isn't. Second, what do we want? So I think we're at really this phase here of shining a light on who are we now? What are we now? what do we want now? I think when we think about leadership, that's what's needed right now is bold vision for what is possible. And I'm not just talking about surviving, or I'm not just talking about how do we return to normal, because there are scenarios, obviously, but what is possible? The highest possible potential of us, what is that? I want conversations about that, because they're the ones that infinite potential of community when we connect with each other. We decide what we want, we work out what we've got to get there, we bridge the gap between what we don't, and we create that new identity, that new future together.
So I'm enjoying this. The best thing about these conversations is I get to, everybody, one of my buddies, Kyle's just jumped on Facebook Live as well. So if you've got any questions, Kyle, put them in the chat. I can see them. Where I was headed was, well, how do we reframe it, and then how do we navigate through it? And so you've actually said a couple of different things. So I think first, step one is that whole idea of the reframe, that we are in a liminal space. Step two are those practical things about how community is defined and what it is. And then there's that third piece around the role of leaders, which is obviously a passion that I've got as well in leadership development. So if I was to get you to talk about the role of leaders, like, what are you seeing at the moment? What are you noticing? What are you hearing? Because I have to admit, as you were saying that, I'm going, oh, you know what? I think we've actually got a little bit more of those news screens coming at us with all the different things that are going on in the world at the moment. And I reckon as a leader, it would be easy to get distracted or easy to get caught up in too much detail and not miss the possibilities that are on the horizons. And so just really interested to hear your thoughts around a bit more around the role of leaders, what the dangers might be if they were to miss something, and how we can really step up boldly.
Well, yeah, so I love this question, because the first thing I would say is,
cool.
We take the definition of leadership from Heifetz and Linsky, because you mentioned it, Heifetz, early in this conversation. Leadership is an act, or it's an exercise. It's an exercising. It's a behaviour. Yeah. So the first thing to say is not a position. And I think this is a mental shift we need to take here. Is first, it's a position. It's not a position. It's exercising. It's exercising leadership to help people tackle tough challenges to thrive. That's the definition that Heifetz talks to. So if we break that down, as a leader, I'm doing something to mobilize, connect with, support a group of people to engage in a problem, inverted commas, that is difficult, that they may or may not want to do, in order to go beyond it to thrive.
That's right.
So then I would say, well, there's probably not a lot of leadership going on from people in positions of authority. You just have to look at what's hitting our TV screens, right? And the political leadership, both nationally and globally. It's all, I don't even know what to call it right now, but it's probably not leadership isn't the word I would use. So if I take a step back from that and I go, well, leaders at the moment, I think, and this is a second reframe, is we're focusing on fixing problems rather than pursuing possibilities. So I think we need to move from a problems focus to a possibilities focus.
Yeah, right.
Because the very notion of that has generative potential to it. A problem, by its very definition, has a boundary. What we're trying to do in solve problems is define what it is. By the very nature of trying to define what it is, it closes down options. Possibilities, well, that's an opening up of boundaries. So we get way more options or way more possibilities when we look at possibilities orientated. So then I go to the next step of that element. There is possibilities focus rather than problems focus. Is if leadership is exercising, is a doing of something, then what comes with that, I think, is a person or people having a sense of purpose. A clear set of principles about what values, what I will and won't stand for. And this is a developmental thing, right? So I'm sort of combining a couple of things here, but developmentally, human beings, every single one of us, you, me, Kyle, every listener that's listening now or listening later, has a identity, and that identity grows up over time to a point where it doesn't. Developmental theory says that people can evolve infinitely, right? The only limit to that is our own limited thinking. But when I think about how people look at, say, purpose, the majority of people see purpose, if I look statistically, as a goal. My purpose is to build the best team, right? I see that more like a goal. I won't say it's simple, but it's more like I can set a target around that and I'm going to achieve it. But purpose, more I won't say more sophisticated, but more complex purpose is about creating environments where people connect about what they care about. That's why I see about sharing intimate thoughts and feelings, which is about community. More about that is how do we create the conditions for people to thrive? It's not just about, and if as soon as we start today thrive, well, we need to start looking at ourselves, like what's important to me? Because if I pursue what I care about, the pragmatics are that it's not going to suit everybody. So leaders need to stop trying to please everybody or find the middle ground and be bold about what they think is the right way to go. Now, how do we find that? We're going to find our own inner, like our true north and within, and a set of values around that. And there's a bunch of processes about how we get engagement. But what you can see in popular press right now is people trying to please everybody and nobody's satisfied.
Well, or there's abdication. That's the other. It's because of COVID, or it's because of this, or it's because of that. So there's either misdirection or abdication, or actually focusing on something else other than the actual issue at hand. But what I'm appreciating about the way you're approaching it is the questions that you're talking about are the tools that we can use to begin to shape what's possible. And we can begin to shape that in any environment, in a virtual environment, in an in-person environment, or in a hybrid environment. That's what I'm hearing anyway.
Definitely. It's simply the mechanism for how we do that changes, but they will be the same. And so what is it that we care about? So what is it that I care about? What's important to me? And therefore what's important to us? So I think about a collection of people. It's about finding out what that is. What is the world out there we see? Because the world out there we see then determines how we're going to respond. So, for example, if I see the world out there as a threat, then I'm going to engage in a way that's about protection. If I see the world out there as a world to be overcome, then I'm going to set up a way of leading in this way. If I see the world out there as a win or lose, then, well, I want to be on the winning side. But what's key here for us as leaders to go, leaders carve out context. So that involves us looking out there and saying, what do we see? Given what we see and understand, that might be a version of truth, we then need to work out what do I see can be done about that? And that's, and is it my work to do? So, like, to be really honest, there are so many issues so many opportunities or possibilities right now out there. My work is about carving out a context where I have a unique set of skills, know-how, experiences, passion, and purpose to be involved in. And trusting that someone else is going to do the work that I see that's not mine to do. And this is what sometimes leaders forget, is they try and do everything. Just do one thing really well.
Well, that also in one way invites the whole concept of community back in again, doesn't it? Because there is this idea of the fact that, we is better than me, the whole sort of Ubuntu idea, the fact that I need all of the good that you bring and all of the good that I bring. And if you don't bring it, there's going to be deficit somewhere. Now, it may not be because of you, because you're thoroughly responsible and proactive, and you have a lot of initiative, but it's actually taking a contribution frame, an initiative frame, and saying, this is what I'm going to bring, even in the midst of where people are suffering loss, or whether they're suffering a sense of setback, or however it is. That's a really positive way of shifting it, I think. I'm really curious to understand just that connection between community and the contribution of the individual. So bring it back to that one person that's listening right now. You said then, what lights me up, what brings me that sense of joy or value or purpose, and then how do I actually give that to someone else? I'm a big believer in you can't fill someone else's cup, you can only empty yours. It's a statement from a guy called Andy Stanley. The idea is that I actually benefit when I bring my best, and when I contribute, when I find places to add value and give. And in the context of reigniting and reestablishing community at home, at work, and in your neighbourhood, how would you comment on that?
Well, at about the same time that I posted that thing that caught your attention, and we had a conversation about it. I just finished a series called Purposeful Positivity series, and basically what I was noticing in my online, my Facebook community, is a lot of negativity coming through. This is just after it went into, it's in July probably. There's a bit of misery going on, not just in Melbourne, but globally too. And I made a commitment that I would post something positive every day in my Facebook feed for 30 days. And the intention there was, in essence, trying to trick our algorithm so I got more positive stuff, to be honest. So it was really about me. But the thing here is that by continuing to fill up my own cup, I also create opportunities for other people to fill theirs up too. So it's sort of a slight variant of your thing. I can only empty my cup, yes, but I've got to keep filling it too. So so this notion here of looking at how do we do everyday practices or practices around positivity. Now, there's a few things here, because the first is, if I think about positivity, the first step is about a practice or practices. Like, we do stuff, and we might do meditation or prayer, for example, as a practice, or we can talk to other people. The next step is we need to connect with a set of values or principles of things we care about. Like, we tend to feel more energized when we align with what our own moral compass. And we know this, that if we start to chip it away about what we think is right, then then our soul gets a bit husky, So the next element is about passion. So I think about this for myself personally. What are my daily practices? What are my principles and values here? What are my passions? What's my purpose? And continuing to lean into possibilities. Now, as I do that for myself, then actually I'm doing that and I share it, because that's the everyday act of community, is sharing what I'm doing. Yeah. Not expecting someone's going to take it, but a mentor once said to me, when you lead, you don't lead for the person in front of you, you lead for the people that might be watching. So who knows who's watching what I'm doing? But be sure that if we're leading, we're being observed. So it's, how do I show up in every interaction and every moment in a way that brings out my best? Yeah. Because brings out my best invites other people to do the same.
I think there's an active example. I actually agree with you entirely around the metaphor of the cup. For example, I don't take it as anyone else's responsibility to fill my cup. I take responsibility for that. But then, as a leader, other people see it modeled in what it is that they can be doing. So in this idea of community connection, understanding what it is that we might be lost, being in liminal spaces, reframing it into the future, where could it go off track? Like, I often have conversations with clients around, I call it the train wreck idea. I said, if you hired me, I came in, I did my best work, and in 6 months it was a complete mess, what would happen? And I ask that question because I want them to start to talk about what might be a little bit systemic, or what might be a little bit implicit in their culture and in their behaviours, just to sort of figure out, okay, are we aware that we love going on training courses but doing nothing with it, or we love complaining about the politicians or the global pandemic but doing nothing about it in my community? So if someone missed this completely, Rich, and it went off track, what would they be doing? What would that characterise? Kyle's also got a question in there. At this point in time, what does courageous leadership look like? So perhaps finish off with that idea.
So let me answer both at the same time. So, what is courageous leadership? Maybe we'll start there.
There you go.
So, I don't know. It's a quick answer to that question. But what I will say is, if we take courage, and the French root, courage comes from a French word. I don't know how to speak French, but something like cœur or something similar to that. And in essence, its direct translation is a rage of the heart. So,
bring it on.
A rage of the heart is, I feel so passionate about something, I cannot not act upon it. So I think it's incumbent on leaders. Courageous leadership is about leadership, helping people to tackle tough challenges to thrive. And this isn't just an intellectual activity, it's an emotional and relational activity.
Yeah, it's all in.
And it's all in. It's feet first. It's what can I not do? And the very nature of courage is, I remember doing a piece of work several years ago where I asked leaders about, tell us about their most courageous moments. And the key theme that came out from this appreciative inquiry process that I was going through is, in order to activate courage, risk must also be present. So if there's no risk, there's no need for courage. Like if I know how to do something, I don't need courage. It's only when I don't have a clue how to do something, where the risk is high, the courage is going to show up. And coupled with that is this idea of vulnerability. I need to be fully prepared to be exposed through the process. Like if I don't have a sense that I'm going to be exposed, like risk being success or failure, for example, and vulnerability being emotional success or failure, or relational success or failure, well, courage isn't necessary. So I would suggest that maybe to Cole's point, this idea of courageous leadership is actually how we know we're getting off track, is when we stop feeling courageous, we're either think we know what the future is going to be and therefore don't think there's no risk involved, and that's a misnomer because the future hasn't happened yet. And we need to be prepared to lean into uncertainty to really work out what's there. But if I say what could go off track, will really, in 6 months' time, the key thing I think will go off track is if we're still trying to repeat the past. That would be the biggest thing, is we have a huge opportunity at this point in time to reset. And COVID has provided us an opportunity to look within ourselves and say, what's important to me and what's important to you and what do we want? And it's in essence not, it's becoming more active with our future rather than a passenger or a tourist to it. Because the pragmatics are, if we don't choose our future, someone else will. And I think for the last decade or two, the future's been chosen for us, and now we have a chance to choose our own. So thinking wistfully about the past. Although important, I'm not just discounting we've got to mine the gold of the past, but a return to the golden old past isn't going to help us.
So it's about missing that liminal space. We're actually saying all we actually really want is for things to go back to normal, which is already past its by. What we really need to be doing is that courageous, bold leadership, courageous, bold community, in a way to re-commune and say, okay, how do we want this to be now that we're in a different world?
That's right. Every moment is a new. The very thing that we're in right now is the present moment. Like, let's be here. Let's not hunker for the past. In a way, like, this idea of community is about sharing our intimate thoughts. I think the most, and feelings in our relationships. So right now, our time is about being vulnerable, being courageous. Look, this is where we're at. This is what I want. This is what's important. This is what I'm afraid of. If I think about the two fundamental emotions that people are experiencing right now, two of them are anxiety and fear. Now, anxiety is a past-focused, oriented emotion. It's recalling something that's occurred and feeling uncomfortable about that, an anxiousness about a return to that way. So I think a bunch of people are feeling a little anxious about going back, right? And fear is a future-focused emotion. It's looking to the future and not liking what we see. But the liminal space, there's no anxiety and there's no fear, because in this moment, there's nothing but what is. It's only when we try and get out of this present moment. So what I'm suggesting here is, even though we want to look to the future, we're only looking to the future about being bold about what's possible to then make more informed choices in the present moment. Mm. It's not about trying to live there and a wish, that's false hope. Real hope is a sense of self-belief about where I'm at, and a sense of agency about my own destiny. It's pathways into the future, and it's passion. I call this, want power, what do I want? Willpower, what do I believe I can do? And way power, where am I going? And that's what we can do in this present moment, is foster or cultivate hope for ourselves and for each other.
Yeah, I just appreciate that so much. I mean, I'm still back on that definition of leadership, like a rage of the heart, and how strong that emotion is that goes with it. And then I think also how easily the possibilities of the situation that we're in can slip away from us because of either something that's happening over the next week or something that's not happening. For example, in the city of Melbourne, a lot of it is about the nots as opposed to the things that are happening. So it's more like omission, not commission. Yeah. So we need to wrap this up. I've got one. Is there a question I should have asked you that you want to answer in this conversation, my friend?
Yeah. So not a question per se, but I think a question that I'd invite each person who's listening to this, or each person who's going to listen to this, to ask themselves. And it's based on a premise that I have, that expectations kill joy. Sure. So the question I have is, what expectations do you have about what is currently happening that are distracting you from fully being in what is happening? And I guess that's the question I ask myself, is what do I expect to happen? Now, what are my expectations about what this should be like that are distracting me from fully embracing what is? Because the pragmatics are that until I fully accept what is, I can have no hope of moving somewhere else. Yeah. And I think that's what's I'm sitting with as you asked me that question, is not, it's really about what expectations. So maybe I'll ask myself that question to conclude, is what expectations do I have right now that killing joy for me.
Yeah, I think that's the invitation to actually think about that. And then if we just reverse engineer that a little bit, now what expectations have I got of my community moving forward, and how do I contribute to that positively? What expectations have I got of the new world of work moving forward, and how do I contribute to that positively? What expectations have I got of my role as a leader or my leaders right now, and how do I contribute to that positively? I think the reframe's a real great opportunity.
Yeah, thanks for reframing it, right? Because it is, because the ultimate thing here, I think, is joy. Joy doesn't have a negative antecedent. It's like a master emotion in a way. We can't. There's no negative opposite to joy. So what we need to be, my sense, orient ourselves to is anything that gets in the way of joy. This rage of the heart that we talked about earlier is still about passion. It's about the pursuit of what we care about. It's the pursuit of joy.
Yeah. Well, it's what I wrote a blog about this. It's what I call the possessions of the soul. So I think there are things that we can feel, but then there are things that we can possess. And so much about what you shared just makes perfect sense to me. I often use this conversation to leverage the things that I'm doing in the practice, but because of the technology disruption that we had before we went live, I didn't do it. And on Monday, I'm launching a program, and we're marketing globally. We've got people from 20 nations, and I tell you what, it is all hanging out as to whether or not just people register, but then whether or not they turn up. And that sense of rage of the heart, passion, joy, expectation, vulnerability. I told one of my buddies, I said, I'm equal parts excited and scared, and it all just rolled into one. But I think if we know that there are possessions of our soul, but we let circumstances take those things away or numb them or dumb them down, then I think this conversation has given us some real handles to actually make some positive steps forward. So I want to say thanks, mate. I really appreciate it. If people want to get in touch with you, what do they need to do, and where do they need to go, Dr. Richard Harmer?
Yeah, well, my website, richardharmer.com. I say that, I need to make sure the email address is on there, but just email me. If you want to have a further conversation. I would say that I've got a program as myself coming out in December called Life by Design, and it's really in the same vein that we're talking to, is how do we be intentional about designing the life, relationships, job, whatever it might be, that fills our cup. And so, stay tuned to the website. There might be something on that very soon. richardharmer.com. There's the website. And, email me. I'd love to have a chat with anybody who found something about our conversation interesting.
What's your email address? What's your email address, Rich?
It's me, at richardharmer.com.
There you go. Well, that's who you are. Now, Kyle wants to know, last thing, deeply philosophical, tigers or cats?
Wow. This is a tough one. So I have to defer to Charlie, who's my 12-year-old. Yeah, because, and he said, Dad, it's the Tigers for sure.
Yes, Charlie.
He's been watched every game, and he goes, it's going to be the Tigers, Dad. It'll be a blowout. So I'm saying that, to be honest, because Carl's asked a question, I really don't have a clue. Like, I do watch the football, but when the Bombers went down, my level of interest in the football goes down with it. So I was starting to lose interest as the season went on.
You are a perfect parochial Victorian, and on that, we will leave it. I want to say thanks for your time, mate. Appreciate you heaps, personally and professionally, and we'll obviously be sharing this more broadly as well. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, Ro. Really good to chat with you. Thanks, everyone who tuned in and anyone who will tune in later. Have an awesome afternoon. Get out and see some sun.
See ya.
See ya.